Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to the Complete with Purdeep Show. My name is Purdeep Sangha, and I am your host for today. So I am super excited for today's episode for a couple of reasons. One is we have an amazing guest. He's also a good friend of mine. So stay tuned for our guest coming on today because you're definitely going to want to hear what he has to say. And secondly, I'm super excited because we just launched our new book 2 days ago, The Complete Man. It is out. It is live. This is literally 2 decades of work in the making, and I spent this last year writing this book. So in time of COVID, I thought we could use better leadership for the men out there. There's a lot of guys out there that are struggling, whether that's with your job, your career, your family. There's a lot of families that are feeling the social pressures and just all the social distancing that's happening. It's having a massive impact on society, and it's for family units as well. So this show is for you if you are a gentleman. But we also get a lot of female watchers out there too, so I'm not going to discriminate. But this show is specifically for guys, business professionals who are entrepreneurs, business owners, career professionals, CEOs, executives who really want to have it all in life. You want to have the successful career in business. You want to have that awesome relationship. You want to be the best father that you can and be the leader that you want in your community, as well as all the other fun stuff like the wealth, the fancy cars, the big homes, whatever you want in life. This show is about helping you attain that. So just again, I want to give you a quick update on this book. You can get it for free right now on Kindle. If you text the word Kindle, actually it's incorrect there, but if you text the word Kindle to 888-210-5566, we will send you the details of how to get the book for free. Today is the last day that you can get it for free before you'll actually have to pay for it. So today's episode is about something I can say is very important for a lot of guys. It's the word control. It's one of the 13 C's of being the complete man. So as guys, let's just be open. We like to have control, right? It's one of those things that we enjoy having in life, or we want to have. And when things are going against what we want, or let's just say we feel like we're not in control, that's when we lose that confidence. That's when we lose that clarity. And I see this in working with guys a lot, is it's one of the main elements that we look for in life. Again, when our business isn't going well, we feel like our life is going out of control. Or when our relationship isn't at that level, we're having an argument with our spouse, or perhaps we're at the degree where we don't know if this relationship is going to last any longer. Are we still going to have that family unit that we had before? Are you going to lose your kids if you're going through a divorce? All of this stuff impacts your level of control, which ultimately impacts your happiness. So as guys, let's just be straight up. When you don't feel like you're in control, life isn't that great. But when you have more control, it feels like things are a little bit better. So why is that? And how do you actually get over this? And so one of the things that I tell guys is, control is really an illusion. There's nothing you can really control except for yourself. And even trying to control yourself, you can't do it 100%. You can get better at controlling yourself. And that's why we have Dr. Parmjeet coming on with us here very soon. He's going to talk about mindfulness, which is a key component of, you can say, mastering your inner self, your inner control. But here's one tip that I want to give you. And this really helped me, and this helps a lot of guys out there when it comes to helping you feel more in control, is having options. You have to remember that there's always a choice. You have a choice. Life is all about choices. You're never bound to one particular thing, one particular path, unless you're kept in a cell and locked away against your will. You will always have options and choices. And when you have more options and choices, you will feel like you have more control. By simply creating more options, by simply writing down more options, if you're feeling like you're stuck and saying, okay, what are my options in this situation? You will actually create more inner control. Your brain will actually feel like you're more in control by having those options. So that's one quick, tip I want to give you. And so with that, I want to bring out our guest. He's a good friend of mine. He's also a professor at McMaster University, which is not too far from here. His name is Dr. Parmjeet Singh. He's an expert in many different things, but also a well-known expert in the space of mindfulness and psychology. So thank you, Dr. Parmjeet, for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you, Purdeep. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's my pleasure. You know, we're
How are you
every
doing?
time I'm doing great, and for those of you out there, when Parmjeet speaks, you know, it's really interesting because he reminds me of my grandfather, who I believe to be a very wise man. He's the gentleman that I learned the most from in life, and whenever I speak to Parmjeet, it's phenomenal because I'm listening very carefully in terms of how he speaks, his choice of words, and what he has to say because I always learn something. So I encourage you to really pay attention to the conversation we're going to have here, which is going to be an open conversation. But Parmji, maybe you can give us a little bit of background in terms of what you teach right now and what you do from a professional standpoint.
Thank you, Purdeep. So I have few layered life. So I teach at McMaster in the health sciences program, where I do actually very custom based programs. So none of my courses are text based. They are really a kind of a combination of my academic training as well as my personal experience. So that's how I put together all the courses. I also teach in medicine professional competencies, so which deals with ethics, self-care, and all sort of things, communication skills. And I have been doing that for, I think, if I'm not incorrect, around 15 years now. And then I also instruct in business school, executive education. I run custom programs from them. I guest speak an MBA program, executive MBA, and that's pretty much the synopsis of what I do. And then largely whatever I do is inspired and integrated from my personal life, because that's how I started. There's things I've been doing since teenager, and then I actually put that together in the context of the teaching, and that's pretty much what I do.
That's awesome. And you're also a husband, you're a family man, you got a couple of kids.
Yes, we have a couple of kids, and one of those is 5 years, so you can figure out our hands and means everything is full. And with the pandemic going, it's crazy because they elected to the remote learning, and it seems like we are undergoing kindergarten every day.
That's good. That's why I have so much respect for teachers, especially elementary and high school. They have a lot of patience, right?
It is incredible. Means I think we don't appreciate how much they do. Especially, it's difficult to manage one kid. I know you have kids, and it's incredibly difficult to navigate one kid, especially when they're caught up in this whole, you know, closed down or maybe partially closed down environment, and dealing with 10, 15 kids at once who are not yours is requires incredible amount of patience, you know.
Yeah.
And I do have a huge respect for teachers, because though they get paid for their job, but it's still an incredible amount of patience and and the thing they have to put up with day in day out.
hmm
So
Yeah, there's two occupations right now that I have a lot. Obviously, teachers, but also people in medicine. As you know, part of my wife's in medicine, and she's at the hospital, and she has to double up her mask. She has got to wear face shields every day, and the gowns. And it's not easy for the medical professionals out there. So for those of you out there, if you're in the medical field, I basically I salute you. I give you a ton of praise for everything that you're dealing with right now. Parmjit, we're in an interesting time right now. Obviously, with COVID and everything that's happening, there's a lot of people that are feeling, and this is why I brought you onto the show because it's so important and the work that you do. Because so many men out there, and I'm going to say men, but obviously it's women and children as well. But this show is specifically for men. Is they're feeling down and out. Their emotions are, you can say, at an all-time low for a lot of people. The work that you do in the mindfulness space, can you talk about some practical things that men can do right now to help themselves and help their families and help their children go through this tough time?
yeah, of course, it's I think this the most simplest thing all of us can do, whether it is about men or women, is that actually what do you do for self nurturing? Means Means we do talk about self-care, and self-care can take a variety of forms. People do physical self-care, people do emotional self-care, people go to spas, people go to clubs, people golf, all sort of things can be clubbed under self-care. But there's another thing: what do you do to nurture yourself? What exactly happens at your emotional level? Because if I'm not nurturing my emotional self, then I'm probably not going to be available to others.
Can I
In the
just, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I am going to interrupt because what you just said is a very important point. Is there's a difference between doing stuff and self-nurturing. Can you go into that? Because I think it's a lot of people are doing things to keep themselves busy rather than self-nurturing.
Yeah, it is actually. In fact, I think that's a story of our culture because we are very doing driven, and there's a value in that. Means people fill up their calendars, they have a to do list on their fridge magnets, and all sort of things do serve a value. But there's also another thing we need to do, which in fact nurture us. The idea of doing nothing. Means
Mm,
I was having this conversation with the Roche people a couple of weeks back, and we say that we have to start asking these kind of deconstruct this popular misconceptions in our culture that doing nothing has nothing to do with anything useful. Because
mm,
doing nothing, which to me is a self-nurturing, is a preparation to do something meaningful. You know, and it's just like and doing nothing can take many forms. People sleeping is a doing nothing. From means it doesn't serve any tangible purpose. Of course, the things on your calendar still remains the same the moment you sleep and you wake up. However, the quality of that doing nothing, the quality of sleep, can inform how well you navigate the next day you wake up.
mm.
If your sleep is, you have well rested, your quality of your day is going to shoot up remarkably and demonstrably. But if you have not slept well, or you have a broken sleep or interrupted sleep, it is going to have a huge impact on the way you navigate your the next day. So that's one non-doing. Another, that's evolutionary designed system of allowing us to get out of this, I think, mad race busyness. But the second part is, what do you do intentionally to nurture yourself? So, for example, we talked about mindfulness. I'm a practitioner myself, and every time I sit, it is my way of nurturing myself. And I give you a context. When I came to Mac around 20 years back, and when I was just moving around in the campus, and I got to know people, and they will ask, "What do you do in your spare time, and what are your hobbies?" and all those things. And I will say that I'm a kind of a student of meditation, and those were the times when it was not such a kind of an in thing at the moment. Meditation was still on fringes, and they will say, "Why do you waste your time?" I mean, this is the thing I have heard from people, and these are well-meaning people who have known for now all these years, and that has always struck me, because meditation is, regardless of whatever has been made out of it, or mindfulness, whatever is made of it, it is an act of a very intentional non-doing. It is an act of nurturing yourself so that you can do well what you need to do outside of that time period, whether it's related to your family, to yourself, your job, your responsibilities, all kind of things. Because the quality of your mind would inform the quality of all the things you do. If your mind is scattered, if my mind is not rested, if it is all caught up in the worries and anxieties and antsiness, it that whatever I do is going to get corrupted with that. So there's a value in actually stabilizing yourself, and that's what mindfulness, especially if you see it in the way it needs to be seen, does. It allows us to optimize our mental apparatus, so that we can, so our perceptions are clear, so our actions are intentional as well as clear. So that's pretty much, to me, is the idea of uh, nurturing yourself. And we know from research that people who are emotionally available to themselves, or people who take care of themselves, are more likely to be available to others, because they can somehow see other people where they're coming from.
Yeah, I like that, and that's one of the, you could say, old philosophical sayings. Is it's difficult to give to someone else what you don't have inside, and so that could be love, that could be passion, that could be whatever it is. You have to have that internally for yourself as well. I'm particularly interested because you and I have, I would say, kind of come to a similar realm in terms of meditation. I'm a mindfulness practitioner. I'm not a teacher, but one of the things that I find really, you can say, soothing for me is when you talk about empty space, because I think we so overlook that in society. Because I want to get into that a little bit deeper, and I want to talk about my personal experience here. Is one of the reasons why I meditate, and I learned this since a young age, is it allows me to feel like all the weight is lifted off my shoulders. With that empty space takes away all of that stress. It allows me to just be there without anything, without any obligations, without any responsibilities, without any accountability. And especially for me, having a business, being an entrepreneur, coaching other people, having 2 kids, that empty space is so needed, that it gives me not only energy to be able to do the stuff, but it just gives me this sense of, how would I say it, self-love and self-peace, which I find very useful. One of the things when I work with guys is when they talk about meditation, guys who have never meditated, is they have a tough time doing it at the beginning. They have a tough time with the mindfulness practices. What suggestions do you have for those guys that are trying to approach it similar to a sport, right, with more intensity? Because this, I kind of relate it to similar to golf. It's kind of like the harder you try, the worse you get. I suck at golf.
It's absolutely. I think one of the things we all need to do is, because mindfulness has been pretty much, it's heavily popularized. There's a value to that, because a lot more people know about it, but there's a lot of mischaracterization goes about mindfulness, and that has hyped up people's expectation. And it's hyped up, but also hyped up mixed with mischaracterization gives people wrong idea. So people struggle outside and then they start struggling inside, because the idea here is to the mindfulness. If you actually look at the root words, it is about really clear seeing, means seeing things as they are. It does not say anything that you have to see things in this way or that way, that you have to feel this way or that way. That idea itself, that 10 minutes you spend with yourself, 50 minutes you spend, 1 hour you spend with yourself, can you be with yourself without any expectation, and let the things settle down? Things you talk about, empty space, means once you let the things settle down and you're not needling your own thought process, you start to realize that the weight is lifted off, because a lot of noisy thoughts and emotions and feelings are like in weight in our mind. They're kind of wear and tear on the mind, and more wear and tear we have on the regular basis, more likely we have less to offer to other people. And whatever that other people could be, it could be your spouses, it could be your kids, it could be your job, it could be your role, it could be your business. Whatever you do, you have less to offer, because more is being we're worn and torn by the noisiness in our head. So one of the things this is the way I'm going to take on to what, as a practitioner here, not advice giver, is that we have to get off this kind of a commercial connotation of mindfulness, and that it manages stress and all those. It does that remarkably. Whether you want to believe it or not, it will come itself, because once you give yourself a chance, once you give your body a chance, the body will do what it does the best. If your body has not rested, you give a chance, it will rest. If it has not slept, you give it a chance, it will sleep, because that's what the body does. That's how the human species have survived, by just doing certain very small things which will allow it to reboot itself. So what mindfulness allows us to do is get ourselves out of the way, stop controlling too many things, and just be comfortable with the discomfort of not controlling. The funny counterintuitive part of, I know one of the undertones of your show today is control, Means mindfulness is about controlling, but not in the manner we tend to control. We control through ego. We just pull all the stops to control all the variables. But mindfulness is okay. You can control some things, but there are a lot of things about your mind you can't really control. You can't really hold the water, and you can do that experiment. You cannot hold the water. The harder you in fact try to hold it, the faster it slips through your to your fingers. But the easier way to hold the water is just to spread your palm. Just be comfortable, that enough. And the same way we do with the mindfulness, that all you can do is just be in the moment and be comfortable with whatever shows up. And when you become comfortable with that uncomfortable, somehow in a very strange way, you regain some of the control you have been seeking. Because the more you are, in fact, the more you're struggling, more things are not in your control, even though you're exerting a lot more cognitive as well as physical effort. And that might give you the idea that you are in control, but it's going to be labor intensive and exhausting. And that's why most of the people burn out, because they're always trying to control the things in a typical sense of term. It's just like bulldozing through life. And of course you can bulldoze, and you can also build a lot of things on it, but is it going to be useful? That's the question that each one of the individuals have to ask. So one of my tip is that stop getting hyped up into it. Sit with yourself, be comfortable with the discomfort, and maybe for that 10 seconds or 10 minutes or 1 hour, let go of the idea that something spectacular has to happen. Okay. And once you let go of that idea that something spectacular, which is a product of your mind, it has nothing to do with the reality. We are doing the same thing as earlier. You are bringing the same attitude to the things you do outside of you. Now you're doing the same thing to yourself. So nothing much has changed. So unless we change, we actually miss the benefit of mindfulness or meditation by a wide margin, because now you are already caught up in the life outside of you. You are struggling there. You are running around like a hamster on cocaine. Now you're doing the same thing inside you, because inside there's nobody else. You are the only one. You are the observer and you are the observed. So how do you work with this? And that's where little bit of gentleness and discipline comes in. Means usually we often believe that no pain and no gain, but inside it doesn't help that way, because if you are pushing yourself, you're really acting your own adversary. We challenge ourselves. As a practitioner, I challenge myself every day, because you sit with yourself, you work with your thoughts. Some of those thoughts are not great, but the challenge is not the same as adversarial stance. You challenge yourself, but you are gentle. So two things, in fact, as a practitioner, you have to be disciplined in the practice, like any other thing. If you want to do something useful, you have to be disciplined. The second, you have to be also gentle at the same time. And these two things for most people don't work very well, because they are somehow contradictory. How I can be disciplined, but at the same time I can be gentle with myself. So as a practitioner, that's one thing we do that. Learn to become comfortable with the idea that you are the observer and you are the observed. So let go of the things for those 10 minutes. Just be with yourself. And being with yourself without intervening too much would in fact nurture you. Means if you
Yeah, I think.
see.
Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off there.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think that's brilliant advice. I think that a lot of people put pressure on themselves, and I see it as a fad. It's almost like the Bikram yoga fad that happened right decades ago. Is people are coming in now. It's about meditation for becoming. So there is a difference between meditation and mindfulness, right? And I'm not going to get into that right here, but you could say not two different practices, but they're two different concepts, for example. But let's say when I hear people talk about meditation, and it's a lot of them are trying to do it to become enlightened, and it's really interesting when I hear about this, and when I see people trying very hard, and I laugh, because I tell people, this is my personal belief: if you're living a happy, fulfilled life and you're joyful majority of the time, it's never going to be perfect, then you don't you don't have to meditate to be enlightened, because for me, the whole purpose of meditating is so you can live a happier, more joyful life. This whole concept of enlightenment has been so, I'm going to say, bastardized, kind of like the whole Bikram yoga approach, that it really is about living life to the fullest, to be able to deal with the adversity that we're going through. You also talked about another thing where, we want to control, and this goes back to Buddhist teachings, which, their definition of suffering is resistance, right? If you resist all of the challenges in life, you will continue to suffer. The whole purpose is to be able to accept it, not necessarily accept the outcome, but accept your current situation, because the outcome can eventually be changed or you can influence it. But until you actually accept where you are right now, you're going to continue to suffer. Something I want to ask you, Parmjit, because this is a really touchy subject. You teach ethics. Now, you and I are both Canadians, so we might get a little bit of flack for this, and we got most of our listeners here in the U.S. Ethics, and I'm speaking because I say this show is about no BS. It's about being real, because as men, we have a role as being leaders, not only in society, but also in our families. I'm seeing a massive lack in leadership in so many different aspects right now, especially when it comes to ethics. And I'm going to lean more on the U.S. side right now in the political system, where there's, let's just say, people being straight out sending out false information and it's being accepted. Now, are you? I don't know. Is that part of your? Do you talk about that at all? Is it part of your teachings? What are you seeing from a person that's an expert in ethics and teaches that? What is your perception in terms of why people are allowing that to happen?
I think there's a variety of explanations to that. One of the things which oftenly, I think it's interesting you actually pick up the idea of ethics, because mindfulness in our word oftenly is presented as a way to train our mind, and that's absolutely correct interpretation. But that's the only part of the interpretation. If you actually go back the historical route where mindfulness comes from, it has on one side scaffolded by ethics and moral reasoning, and the other side is the idea of embodied wisdom or experiential learning. So no BS. Don't talk about mindfulness, do it, and then come to your own conclusion. And that's my approach to that. You don't have to listen to me or anybody. Means once you learn the technique, you are the experimenter and you have the space. You are the lab itself. Do it yourself, and you will come to know that it's a lot more nuanced than you actually hear it about in the media. So it's just like mindfulness and all the related stuff is heavily uh, I would say attached to the ethical and moral reasoning. We know from research that people who are less self-aware, they tend to actually make a lot of ethically questionable decisions. Because more I'm interested in myself or self-interest, more likely I'm going to see that I need to advance my self-interest. And by doing so, I'm going to actually see less of other people's interest.
So can you just repeat that? Because I think that's very important. What you just said there, that's a key point there.
Because more I'm interested, more I'm self-interested, I am all caught up in my own world. I am less likely to see what other people's need. And one example I will go, and it's true for ethical decision making as well as for normal taking care of your team members. For example, you are a leader and you are very self-aware, and because you are self-aware, you are likely to actually use that opportunity as well as skill set to see when your team members are suffering. So you will be able to reach out to them. You will be able to sit with them, listen to them, ask them, what can you do as a leader so that that person is able to do well. And if they do well, then you do well. The bottom line of the organization automatically improves when the person, each individual, is doing well. So there's actually pretty much a kind of indications from research that the leaders who are self-aware or more mindful, quote unquote, are more likely to take care of other people than who are not. And it goes back to earlier your observation that if I am not aware of myself, I can BS about it, but I am not going to actually be able to see where people are coming from. We see others through our own self. And if the lens of my own perception is heavily clouded by my own self-interest, my own attachment, my own greed, that is going to do few things. One is it is going to literally distort the way I look at the whole picture. Second, it's going to mess up my ethical decision making process. Third, I'm not going to care much for other people because I'm so self-interested.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And a lot of people wonder why certain people are supporting certain political leaders. And I don't want to go too much into it, but there's that reason why I got you to repeat that was because it seems like we are in such a state, especially when COVID first happened as well, is that we became into this, I call it contraction, where it's like, okay, how gonna protect myself? How am I gonna protect my family? And it became less about how am I gonna help my neighbor? How am I gonna help my community? And we noticed that when people went out there and bought a whole bunch of toilet paper and bought all the groceries and took everything off the shelf, thinking about my family, me, rather than saying, okay, how do we distribute this? And sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, finish your thought. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
No, it's actually it's very interesting. That was interesting observation, but not very surprising because, one thing that has shown through research that we tend to say one thing and do other things when we are met with the reality. So a lot of these people who might have hoarded toilet papers and tons of grapeseed oil and all sort of things, is that if you ask them in actually in a non real circumstances, these people might have a different idea that they will not do it. But most of us do things differently when we are presented with the challenges. So that was interesting to me that that's a total failure of logical thought process, because you don't want that much of toilet paper in your home. Means what a implication of if you actually end up using your toilet paper, you're most likely going to die from that stuff than COVID. You know, because if that much of toilet paper has to be used, so that's a failure of logical kind of a thought process, and we all experience, and the same thing happens with the political parties. And one thing I would suggest that people tend to, this is a kind of a both a flaw and a kind of a good thing about human beings. I tend to think if we don't have that, we will be in real trouble. We tend to trust people. Humans tend to trust each other, and I tend to think that I would rather take this as a positive sign than bad sign, because if the flip side is really bad, if I don't trust you, and if I don't trust my neighbor, and if I don't trust a stranger, our life will be very difficult. You will be always on tenterhooks. So when we tend to trust others, somebody who knows, they actually can hijack the trust. And I think that's where the people in power, they tend to know that because somebody, for example, you cannot hijack my trust if I don't trust you. So this is actually one of the very key problem in the human nature, which serves to our advantage, but also is oftenly hijacked by self-interested people. And that's how the politicians do that, and how leaders also do that, because they inspire that kind of trust, and then because they have a malified intentions, to so to speak. Or I would even say that they may not have a malified intention, they actually are not very aware of what actually is going to be the outcome, because they are so self-interested.
And I think that's a brilliant point, because that goes to what we talk about here on the show, which is the mindful alpha male, right? And we're all about being alpha males, about leading in society, leading in family, but you have to have that mindful component, which is knowing what your outcomes are, knowing what the situation is, knowing who you're going to impact and influence, and giving as much as you're taking. Going back to the trust part, it's really important, because this not only applies in the political environment, but it applies in the business world, right? Because there's trust and mistrust, but people are more likely to trust people that are similar to them, whether it's a geographic region, whether you sit in the same city, or you're part of the same ethnic group or political party or whatever it is. So they will trust people of similarities, but mistrust people with dissimilarities, which is the interesting part. You know, when you talked about that, That, I think, those are two factors in terms of why we have such divide in certain areas, whether it's political or other aspects. But there's this concept of, hey, you're not like me, therefore it's harder for me to trust you as well. And so that plays a part, in so many different aspects. How do you help people in the business world? Because as you're a corporate trainer, you help executive teams, you help organizations. Trust is a big thing, right? And I work with executive teams as well, because on a lot of executive teams, there's this challenge of power. There's this power struggle. How do you help them build trust when you have highly driven people that are sometimes have self-directed goals versus a unified goal?
So it's actually going back to your point, that's how we evolved, by differentiating. So that's how I navigate my environment, to see that this is my enemy, this is my friend, and I will stay away from the enemy and be close to my friend. And that's how we humans have navigated. That's how we evolved. But as good as it has, it also has a bad. This also leads to tribalism, a lot of self-interest. We know from research that people tend to help others even when they are, for example, you are a part of a very silly game, and you're more likely to help people who you tend to think are your own, quote unquote, and less likely to help people you think are others. And that's how the polarization in politics and even in families means it happens. That kind of polarization, it happens because I tend to think that thought process is the same. One starts at a more local level, and then a much bigger space in politics and in national politics, nationalism, patriotism, all sort of things stem from this idea that similars are yours and dissimilars are not yours. So that by extension of the thought, similars, you have a responsibility towards similars, and you can sacrifice the others, and vice versa. And that's usually what happens. Means it's just fascinating to think that how people actually behave in those kind of circumstances. And some of that is very almost unconscious. Means, for example, there's a fascinating thing that if you actually meet someone first time, there's two things that happens with you within the 50 to 100 milliseconds. And that's one thing it will check. It will notice, your brain will automatically notice the gender of the person and also the skin color. Okay. And from there, you can build up a whole slew of idea how you're going to react. If you don't like that skin color, then that bias will, influence your interaction with the person. And if you're in the leadership position, that might have other things. But that's actually a kind of a conversation for other day. But let me get back to your the main answer about how do we help people come out of that part. I think one of the thing is that power and trust oftenly can be misperceived as oppositional or opposite. Because if you are powerful, then either you are not going to trust me or I'm not going to trust you. And there's actually, and part of it is that we know from research that, for example, power differential creates that kind of perception. So, for example, powerful people don't see, quote unquote, powerless people. They don't see them. They don't see their needs. They don't see their value. They are just use them as a kind of a part of their decision making process. On the other hand, on the flip side, powerless people tend to see people who are in power differently. And that's where actually the politics, in fact, comes in. That's why person who is able to inspire that kind of a trust tends to, in fact, be mobbed by all those people. And interesting part of that is that that person may not actually care any damn about those individuals who support him or her. Okay. So in terms of my thing, why I do that, I think it's important to think that there's a role you play as you play a role as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a spouse, as a leader, and you need to have a kind of a inspired trust in all the people you deal with. And also your role comes with some perception of power. But how do you use that is actually very important to me and to anybody else, because I think if you can be very firm as an expression of power when you have to play a role, then you are doing your role well. And you can be very human when you don't have to exert your, quote unquote, power in any particular way. I think one of the reason why mindfulness can be wonderful for men, especially high strung men, is that it can actually harmonize the expression of masculinity with femininity, because there's a gentleness to it. When you sit with yourself, and the whole idea of nurturing yourself is very gentle. And when those two things come together, then the trust and the power, as well as the nurturing and the role playing, all those things get harmonized. So one can be powerful when they have to. And there's many reasons where, for example, as a decision making, you have to make a difficult decision. But the question is, can you make a decision which is very rational, firm, and you do whatever you need to do for in the context of whatever is happening, but at the same time you can continue to remain human.
Hmm.
A lot of people are good with making either doing. They get swept into the emotions, and then they lose the game, or on the other side they actually become extra firm to the extent of um, being abrasive and extra muscular, and
Hmm.
that I think creates its own problem.
Yeah, I think I'd like to look at it in three ways, and I think it's or three different aspects for people. Is I tend to, people have roles, but we are also all human beings, but we are also living cosmic beings as well. We're all
Yep.
we're all part of the universe, and I think what ends up happening is that we lose respect sometimes for people at the human level, and and this is just my personal belief is okay. I might not respect my colleague from his or her position because they might not be behaving appropriately based on their role, or I don't think they have the expertise or the competence. So maybe I might not have to respect their role, but maybe I need to respect them as a human being. And I think that's fundamentally where sometimes those big challenges happen is when we lack respect as human beings, then we build, then we get into the even bigger power struggles. We get into the lack of compassion. Then we get into things like name calling or even aggressive thoughts, and it just goes down just a bad rabbit hole for a lot of people. So that basic level of respect as human beings, I think, is so important, and that's a component of mindfulness as well. Is just being respectful to say this other person occupies this world just like I do. They have a right to be here, and they have a right to this. And this is where it gets a little bit challenging here for some people because I've had this debate. And we're going down a different path here of the Canadian healthcare system, for example, versus the U.S. healthcare system. And I have a lot of family in the U.S. Most of my clients are in the U.S. I go to the U.S. quite a bit. It's one of my favorite places. And is some people believe that universal healthcare, for example, where people shouldn't have basic healthcare or be able to see a doctor or get basic medicine, shouldn't happen. Whereas my firm belief is I think every human being believes or should have basic access to healthcare, should be able to see the doctor without worrying whether they're going to be able to pay for it, should be able to give birth to a child without feeling like it's going to break their bank and they're not going to be able to afford, having a child. It's a little bit different for us here in Canada, Parmji. I think we might take it for granted. Some of my family members who have children, for example, they don't have healthcare plans. They have to pay $10,000 to $15,000 when they have a child. I'm like, what? When I first heard that, I'm like, that is incredible. Like, there's virtually zero cost in the healthcare system here when we have kids.
It's actually very interesting because I tend to think that the way, um, as much as we think about these things in the terms of, you can think in the moral sense or in the terms of human terms, um, I think it behooves us as human beings to take care of others. You know, if we are rich, we should not act poorly. That's my sense. If I am broke, I think I may have reasons not to help others. But if I'm not broke and I'm not willing to help, and then come up with a slew of reasoning why I should not, I think it's a total BS. It's just like extending the moral argument to the extent where it serves your self-interest. You know, so universal healthcare, and almost everything, it's a part of human dignity, and not. And I think part of it is also the idea that if you don't have a healthcare, or you don't have the wherewithal to actually have that kind of insurance, comes from the idea that you have not worked for it, or maybe you
Mhm.
have not the smarts for it. That is actually very tenuous idea, uh, and it does not bear much under the scrutiny, because we know from, even from a standpoint of research, it does not stand up. People accept some circumstances, people often do what they do within the circumstances, and this argument is oftenly given by people who are well heeled,
Mhm.
and tend to think that's a self protection, maybe too much. Everybody is entitled to self protect, that's, I think we have to be respectful to that. But giving is also part of being human. Giving allows us to cycle through, you know giving is a psychological mechanism. Just, it's like, if you never let go at a physical level, it it makes you unhealthy.
Yeah, and I say, there's you can never, no one can stop you from giving. That's one thing that no one can stop you from doing, is give to somebody else. Give love, give, if it's tangible, give money. That's one thing you can give as much as you want. There's no limit on that. And when you do that, you'll feel so much better about yourself. Going back to one of those points that you made, I think we do sometimes take a look at people, whether it's welfare system or whether it's the healthcare system, we say they don't deserve it because they haven't earned it. Or they haven't worked as hard as I have to get to this position. I think we have to get past that, because even on one of our previous shows, we had a gentleman on, it was the last show, and he was talking about veterans. These are people that went to war, for example, and they have come back and they can't get jobs, and they're on welfare, or they're on other assistance because they just don't have the skills, or they have a post-traumatic stress disorder, all these other things. And I don't think anybody could go to them and say, you don't deserve it, you haven't earned it. So I think there's so many of these different aspects here, but it goes back to that fundamental piece that you keep talking about, is we're human, and being human is about giving. There's a core component there. And
Exactly. And we know, if you look at the research, we know that people, when they're caught up in their own self bubble, they're less likely to be givers than when they, in fact, um, they're not caught up in that. There's actually fascinating study where they wanted to ask people, or at least pick up things which would in fact help people or not. And and what really came out of that study was that one of the singular factor which prevent people from doing good to others is actually busyness.
mm,
It's not how religious they are, it's not how well intentioned they are. More busy people are, less likely they are going to have time to look at the problems that other people face, and less time they would have to offer any solution to that. So it's not, you know kind of big ticket thinking. It's a simply more, I'm busy, more likely I'm busy with my own stuff, more I'm caught up in my own bubble, less likely I'm going to actually look up and see other people. uh, and that happens in both physically, that more busy people are, they are running faster, they are walking faster, they are doing things faster, they don't look at other people. And when they don't look at other people, they don't see other people. When they don't see other people, they don't see their problems. And when they don't see their problems, that cannot tug at their heart that somebody is having problems. And if they don't see that, then they are less likely to help. So some of these things are not very rocket sciencey. If you look at it, it's a very basic human thing. Though we actually come up with very convoluted reasoning for all these things, but I think these are very basic things.
Yeah, and on that point, I think it's so fundamental, and I think this is a good way to kind of close out the show here today. Is the work that we do here. When I talk about being the complete man, it's really fundamentally, yes, guys want to be successful, but there's a reason for it, and there's a reason why I've chosen to do the work that I do, because I know when a man is struggling less in his business and has more success in his relationship and with his family, he can actually start to take his attention off of himself and reduce his stress level, reduce his anxiety, and reduce his busyness, as you talked about, because then he can start taking a look at not only his family in a different light, but also his community and say, how can I give back more? Right? How do I help the community more? And that's when I think, because there's so many guys out there struggling, and if the work that we do here with the Complete Man, we can help them get to that level of wealth, that success, so they're not struggling as much and they can be less busy, they can help other people and help the community. That's ultimately what it's about. I want people to be successful. I want people to be extremely wealthy. I think everybody deserves to have that level of success, but I also believe that people should be giving back. That's ultimately what it's about, because there's only so much money you can have and hoard in the bank and houses or watches before you get tired of it. And it really comes down to contribution. It really comes down to helping other people be able to achieve that as well. Sorry, go ahead, Parmjit. I'm going to let you close it out here.
I think I will add one thing, that I think we should aspire for meaningful success. So that means that if I am actually, it has a meaning to me, then I will always have the quality of my life much better than it is not. Because the things we create outside of us, they all have a shelf life. They all has a limited emotional reciprocity, but there's a something to us. So busy mind is disorganized mind. It is unproductive mind, though it actually is a lot more labor intensive mind, because that's why you're up at night, because your mind is busy and you're not doing well. So there's a value in slowing down. And when we slow down, we can, savor the moment, and we can start from a state of clarity, and we can act according to that. So any action that comes from a state of clarity is going to be much more meaningful, as well as purposeful and more impactful than any act that comes out of lack of clarity, busyness, and all sort of getting caught up in the self-interest.
Oh, that's great. So many points I took away from having this chat with you, Parmjit. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. I know the listeners or the watchers out there are going to get a ton of value. Thank you. And we're guaranteed we're going to have you on the show again here sometime soon, because I know we're going to get some questions. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Purdeep, very much. Take care, be well, be safe, take care of yourself and others, because that's how we help each other.
Great. Thank you. Take care. So there you go. We had Dr. Parmjit Singh on the show. Amazing guest and just a great friend. I love the work that he does. I would highly encourage you to take a look at him. Actually, we'll put up his website in the post here. I believe it's parmjitsingh.com. We'll have to get that back to you. But if you're an executive, you're a CEO, business owner, you got a team, you want to help them, you could say work better, more effectively with each other, I would highly encourage you to reach out to Dr. Parmjit. He's awesome at what he does. But he's had some really great points in terms of being able to be still with yourself, being able to have more clarity just by being less busy. And I think we as guys need to take that on and appreciate that, because yes, we have great intentions to give to our families. We have great intentions to provide our kids, our wives with the lives that we think they deserve. But we also owe it to ourselves to step back and be less busy and take care of ourselves first, which is all about self-nurturing. Phenomenal talk that we had here. I want to thank you for joining us on the show. And I want to just tell you again, you can get a free copy of The Complete Man on Kindle on Amazon. Today is the last day that it's free. If you text the word Kindle to 888-210-5566, we will send you the instructions in terms of how you can download it for free today. And again, I want to thank you for tuning in. Please like and share the show with your friends, your family members, everybody you can think of, because if you got value from it, we want to be able to share that. And also, if you have any questions for us for the next show, please feel free to reach out. Or if you have any thoughts in terms of what kind of guests you want to see, we're more than happy to take those suggestions. So thank you. Have an awesome week, and we'll see you next Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time sharp. Take care.